When I got engaged, I didn't announce anything about my money. Not because I was ashamed. Not because I was hiding something illegal. I just stayed quiet. The ring was modest. Simple gold band, small diamond. The kind people smiled at and said was so us. And it was, at least on the surface. We celebrated with friends, popped cheap champagne, took photos that looked effortless and happy. I let everyone believe that was the whole story, including him. My fiancé, Daniel, moved into my townhouse 2 months after the proposal. He called it our place almost immediately. I didn't correct him, but I noticed it. Not in a suspicious way, just the way you notice a shift in language when something important changes. "Should we repaint the living room?" he asked one night, leaning against the counter. "We can talk about it," I said. He smiled. I like that we're building this together. I smiled back. What I didn't say was that I'd bought the house outright years earlier. No mortgage, no shared debt, just a clean deed sitting in a safe deposit box under my name alone, along with something else. An estate valued at just over $1.2 million. Inherited land, a small rental property, long-term investments my grandmother had quietly set up for me before she died. She'd been practical in a way that bordered on prophetic. "Love doesn't cancel logic," she once told me, "and money doesn't protect you unless you protect it first." At the time, I'd laughed. Now, I heard her voice more clearly than ever. Daniel wasn't careless with money. That's important. He paid his share of groceries, covered dinners, talked about saving for the future. On paper, he was responsible, but there were moments, small ones, comments about how we'd be set once we were married, jokes about how my place was a great starter home for us, casual assumptions wrapped in affection. I didn't argue. I just listened. The first real crack appeared during a dinner with his parents. We were seated at a nice restaurant, the kind with linen napkins and low lighting. His mother leaned across the table, smiling warmly. "So," she said, "have you two talked finances yet?" Daniel answered before I could. "We're figuring it out as we go." She nodded approvingly. That's marriage. Everything becomes shared. Something in my chest tightened. Later that night, as we drove home, Daniel reached for my hand. "Mom likes you," he said. "I like her too," I replied. He hesitated. "She worries about balance." "Balance?" I asked. "You know," he said casually, "who brings what into the marriage? Who sacrifices more?" I waited. "She just wants to make sure neither of us feels exposed." The word lingered. Exposed. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights and thought about the documents I'd reviewed just weeks earlier. The trust structure, the clauses, the protections my grandmother had insisted on. I hadn't told Daniel any of it, not because I didn't trust him, but because trust, to me, wasn't proven by disclosure. It was proven by reaction. A week later, we started wedding planning in earnest. Venues, guest lists, budgets. Daniel suggested something upscale. "If we stretch a little now, it'll be worth it." "Stretch how?" I asked. He shrugged. "We'll figure it out. Combined income." There it was again. Assumption. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I reviewed my accounts, my estate documents, the prenup template my lawyer had sent, just in case. I hadn't committed to anything yet. I just wanted to see. The more I read, the calmer I felt. This wasn't fear. It was clarity. 2 days later, Daniel found the email. I hadn't hidden it well enough. He stood in the doorway, phone in his hand, his expression unreadable. "What's this?" he asked. I took a breath. "It's a draft. A prenup." His voice was tight. "You never mentioned this." "I didn't need to," I said carefully. His jaw clenched. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I met his eyes. "Yes," I said. "There is." The room went very still. "How much?" he asked. "That's not the first question you should be asking," I replied. "But it is," he said quickly. "If you're planning legal protection, I deserve to know why." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I inherited an estate, I said. It's mine. I've kept it separate. On purpose. He stared at me. How much? He repeated. About $1.2 million. The silence that followed was loud. His expression shifted, not to anger, not immediately, but to something else. Calculation. You were just not going to tell me? He asked. I said. Eventually. After I understood what being married to you would really mean. His eyes narrowed. So this was a test? No, I said quietly. This was protection. He let out a sharp laugh. Why didn't you tell me? I studied his face, the confusion, the hurt, the edge underneath it all. And in that moment, I realized something important. The real test hadn't been the secret. It was what he would do now that it was out. And I wasn't sure I liked the direction his thoughts were heading. Daniel didn't leave that night. That detail matters. He slept beside me like nothing fundamental had shifted, his breathing steady, his arm resting across my waist as if muscle memory could overwrite revelation. I stared at the ceiling long after he fell asleep, replaying the way his eyes had changed when I said the number. Not shock, not disbelief, assessment. The next morning, he was unusually attentive. He made coffee, the good kind, grinding the beans instead of using the machine. He kissed my cheek longer than usual, asked about my meetings, offered to handle dinner. You don't have to, I said. I want to, he replied, smiling. We're a team. Team. The word landed differently now. Over the next week, his questions multiplied, but always indirectly. Your grandmother sounded smart, he said one evening. She was, I replied. Must have planned well, he added. I mean, to leave you that much. I nodded, non-committal. Another day, while we were folding laundry, he said, It's kind of impressive, what you've built, or inherited. The correction came too late. He started talking about the future more vividly, about kids, about schools we could afford, about travel once things are combined. Each sentence carried the same quiet assumption, inevitability. I didn't interrupt. I documented. I started keeping a private journal, not emotional, just factual. Dates, phrases, shifts in tone. I'd learned long ago that memory softens edges. Writing doesn't. The Prenup Conversation came up again on Sunday. We were sitting on the couch, his leg draped over mine. TV playing something neither of us was watching. I've been thinking, he said, about the prenup. I waited. If it makes you feel safe, he continued, we can do it. But I think it should be fair. Fair how? I asked. He smiled, reassuring. Shared growth. What we build together should belong to both of us. And what existed before? I asked. He paused, just a second too long. Well, he said carefully, marriage changes things. That night I emailed my lawyer, not to finalize anything, just to ask questions. 2 days later, Daniel invited my parents to dinner, without asking me. They've been excited to spend more time together, he said. It's good to blend families early. Blend. At dinner, conversation flowed easily until dessert. My mother asked, So how's planning going? Smooth, Daniel said. We're aligning expectations. I smiled politely. Then his father leaned back and said, I told Daniel, marry smart. Love is important, but stability matters. Daniel laughed. I think I've done pretty well. The table went quiet. No one mentioned money, but everyone felt it. On the drive home, I said nothing. Neither did he. Later that night, he broke the silence. You could have told them, he said lightly. Told them what? I asked. That you're secure, he replied. It would have reassured them. About what? I pressed. He exhaled. That I'm not walking into something unbalanced. There it was. I'm not a risk, I said calmly. I didn't say you were, he replied quickly. I just think transparency builds trust. I turned to face him. And what builds entitlement? His jaw tightened. You're reading into this. No, I said. I'm finally reading clearly. The next morning, I moved my estate documents to a different safe, one he didn't know existed. I also scheduled a final prenup draft, not because I was preparing to leave, but because I was preparing to see. Trust doesn't collapse in explosions. It erodes in small permissions. And Daniel was asking for more than information now. He was asking for access. The prenup draft arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at work when my lawyer emailed it, clean, precise, unemotional. It outlined what was mine before the marriage, what would remain mine, and what could be shared moving forward. There were no traps in it, no punishments, just boundaries written in legal language instead of feelings. I didn't forward it to Daniel right away. That night he came home excited. "I talked to Mark today," he said, dropping his keys into the bowl by the door. "He knows a great financial advisor. Might be good for us." "For us?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah," he said easily. "Long-term planning, especially with everything you've got." I looked at him. "You've never been interested in financial advisors before." He shrugged. "Circumstances change." They were changing fast. We sat down for dinner, and halfway through, he mentioned something that made my fork pause midair. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe after the wedding we could sell this place." I blinked. "Sell it?" "It's valuable," he continued. "We could upgrade. Something bigger. Turn your assets into something joint." Joint. I set my fork down slowly. "This house isn't an asset to flip. It's my home." He frowned. "I didn't mean right away. Just eventually." "Eventually sounds like a plan," I said. He leaned back, studying me. "Why are you being defensive?" "I'm not," I replied. "I'm being specific." There was a difference, and I needed him to recognize it. Instead, he sighed. "This is what I was worried about." "Worried about what?" "That you don't really see us as a unit," he said. "You're still operating like you're alone." I held his gaze. "I am alone in some things, and that's healthy." He shook his head. "Marriage doesn't work that way." I smiled faintly. "Neither does ownership." The next few days were tense in a quiet way. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just subtle recalibrations. He stopped asking if I needed anything, started assuming. He booked a venue tour without checking my schedule. He suggested a guest list that heavily favored his side. He talked about honeymoon destinations that required dipping into shared savings. Savings that didn't exist, at least not jointly. I watched him closely, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. This wasn't greed in the cartoonish sense. It was expectation, the belief that marriage would unlock something he'd already mentally claimed. One evening he brought it up directly. "I need to understand why you didn't tell me," he said, sitting across from me on the couch. "About the estate." "I wanted to know who you were without it," I answered. "And now?" he asked. "Now I'm learning." He stiffened. "That sounds like judgment." "It's observation," I corrected. He ran a hand through his hair. "Do you trust me?" I didn't answer immediately. "That pause," he said sharply. "That's your answer, isn't it?" "I trust your intentions," I said carefully. "I'm still assessing your expectations." He stood up. "That's not fair." "Neither is pressure disguised as partnership," I replied. The argument that followed wasn't explosive, but it was revealing. He said I was withholding. I said I was protecting. He said marriage meant merging lives. I said merging didn't mean erasing. At one point, he said, "If you loved me, this wouldn't be such a big deal." That was the moment everything crystallized. Love doesn't demand access. It respects autonomy. I stood up, my voice steady. "I do love you, but I won't prove it by surrendering control." He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Later that night, while he showered, his phone buzzed on the counter. A message preview flashed from his mother. Did she agree yet? I didn't open it. I didn't need to. That single line confirmed what weeks of conversations had hinted at. This wasn't just between us anymore. It never had been. When he came out, towel around his waist, humming like nothing was wrong, I realized something sobering. Daniel wasn't malicious, but he was aligned, and alignment matters more than intent. The next morning, I sent the prenup draft to him, with one addition. A note at the top. This is non-negotiable. If it feels threatening, we need to talk about why. I closed my laptop, come settling over me like armor. I wasn't testing him anymore. I was choosing myself. And whatever happened next would tell me everything I needed to know. Daniel didn't respond to the prenup email for 2 days. That silence spoke louder than any argument we'd had. On the third evening, he finally brought it up. Not gently, not angrily either. Carefully, like someone testing the temperature of water before stepping in. This document, he said, holding his phone up, it's very thorough. It's supposed to be, I replied. He sat across from me at the dining table, elbows resting where we'd once planned seating charts and flower arrangements. I showed it to my dad. I felt a small shift inside my chest. You didn't ask. I needed perspective, he said defensively. This affects my future too. It affects your access, I corrected. His jaw tightened. That's a harsh way to put it. It's an accurate one. He exhaled slowly. They think it's extreme. They, I repeated. My parents, he said. They're worried you're planning an exit before we even start. I folded my hands together. I'm planning stability. For yourself, he said. For both of us, I replied. Because resentment grows when expectations aren't clear. He leaned back, studying me like I'd changed overnight. You've become very legal. I smiled faintly. You've become very entitled. That word landed hard. I'm not entitled, he snapped. I just don't understand why you'd marry someone you don't fully trust. I trust you enough to tell you the truth, I said calmly. I don't trust systems that assume women should give up protection once they say yes. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something I hadn't expected. If roles were reversed, he said slowly, would you be okay with this? Yes, I answered without hesitation. He blinked. Really? Yes, I said again. Because love doesn't require ownership, and marriage shouldn't feel like a transfer of control. He stood up abruptly. This doesn't feel like a partnership. It feels like one to me, I replied. Just not the kind you imagined. That night, he slept on the couch. The following week was a blur of forced normalcy. We attended a friend's engagement party, smiled for photos, talked about color palettes and menus with people who had no idea what was unraveling beneath our feet. At the party, someone joked, "So who's the saver and who's the spender?" Daniel laughed and pointed at me. "She's the responsible one." It sounded like praise. It felt like possession. Later that evening, his mother pulled me aside. "I hope you're not letting fear dictate your marriage," she said softly. I met her gaze. "I hope you're not teaching your son that access is a right." Her smile tightened. When we got home, Daniel was quiet. Too quiet. Finally, he said, "You embarrass me." "I didn't say anything," I replied. "You didn't have to," he said. "Your silence said enough." That night, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence. He is more concerned with how this looks than how it feels to me. A few days later, I got an email from his father, not asking, advising. He attached an article about financial unity in marriage and suggested we reconsider starting off divided. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer. Her reply was immediate. "This pressure is not subtle. Pay attention." I was. The breaking point came unexpectedly on a Sunday afternoon while we were packing boxes for a storage unit. "What's in this one?" Daniel asked, pointing to a sealed box in the closet. "Documents," I said. "Let me help," he replied, reaching for the tape. "Don't," I said sharply. He froze. "Why not?" "Because those aren't shared." His face hardened. "You're acting like I'm a threat." "No," I said quietly. I'm acting like you're someone who keeps asking for what isn't his. The room went still. You're pushing me away, he said. No, I replied. I'm standing still. You're the one leaning. He stared at me for a long moment, then said something that changed everything. If this is how it's going to be, he said, maybe we shouldn't get married at all. I nodded once. Maybe we shouldn't. He looked shocked. You're just okay with that? I'm okay with the truth, I said. He walked out that night, took a bag, left his ring on the counter. I didn't cry. I sat at the table and felt the quiet settle around me. Not empty, not lonely. Clear. For the first time since the engagement, nothing was being demanded of me. And that clarity told me I'd already made the right choice. Long before he walked out the door. The morning after Daniel left, the house felt unfamiliar. Not empty, just quieter in a way that made every sound sharper. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, my own breathing as I stood in the kitchen, staring at the ring he'd left behind. I didn't pick it up right away. Instead, I made coffee, slowly, deliberately. I needed my body to understand what my mind already knew. Nothing was collapsing. Nothing was on fire. I was safe. By noon, messages started coming in. Not from him. From everyone else. His sister texted first. He's devastated. He feels blindsided. Blindsided. I didn't respond. Then his mother called. I let it ring. A few minutes later, a voicemail appeared. I don't know what happened between you two, she said, voice tight with restraint, but walking away over paperwork feels extreme. Marriage requires compromise. I deleted it. The next call was from my own mother. Why didn't you tell us things were this bad? She asked. Because they weren't, I replied honestly. They were clear. She sighed. People are talking. They always do, I said. That afternoon, I drove to my lawyer's office. She listened as I recounted everything. The questions, the assumptions, the pressure from his family, the moment he'd reached for the box. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. You didn't end an engagement, she said. You ended an entitlement trajectory. That phrase stayed with me. Over the next week, Daniel tried again. First with apologies. I didn't mean to pressure you, he said over the phone. I just panicked. Then, with bargaining. What if we revise the prenup, he asked. Meet in the middle. Then, with guilt. I feel like you never really let me in. I listened. I didn't argue. And that's how I knew my answer hadn't changed. One evening, he showed up unannounced. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked tired, smaller. I miss you, he said. I know, I replied. I didn't want money to come between us. It didn't, I said gently. Expectations did. He frowned. So that's it. That's clarity, I answered. He looked past me into the house. You're really okay with this? Yes, I said. I am. He nodded slowly, like someone finally accepting a loss they'd been trying to renegotiate. After he left, I sat on the couch and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not the sharp kind that comes from escaping disaster, but the deep, steady kind that comes from alignment. Weeks passed. I returned the ring. I canceled the venue. I donated the dress. Each action felt less like undoing a future and more like reclaiming the present. People asked careful questions. Some judged quietly. Others admired openly. You're brave, a coworker said. No, I replied. I'm prepared. One evening, I visited my grandmother's grave. I told her everything, out loud, about the engagement, the estate, the choice. I get it now, I said, standing there as the sun dipped low. You weren't teaching me to distrust love. You were teaching me to protect myself within it. The wind rustled the trees, and I smiled through tears. Back home, I updated my estate documents. Not out of fear, but out of completion. I made new plans, took a solo trip, reconnected with friends I'd unintentionally sidelined during wedding planning. My life didn't shrink without him. It expanded, One night, months later, I received a message from Daniel. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied honestly, "I am." And for the first time, that answer didn't feel defensive. It felt earned. Because love that requires you to disappear is not love. And protection isn't secrecy. It's wisdom. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Without wedding timelines, without negotiating someone else's expectations, my days felt lighter. Mornings were mine again. Evenings were quiet in a good way, intentional, unhurried. I didn't rush through dinner or check my phone for reassurance that I was doing enough for someone else. I was finally doing enough for myself. A few months after Daniel and I officially ended things, I ran into him at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. The restaurant was crowded, the kind where conversations overlap and no one hears everything anyway. He looked fine, put together, polite. So did I. We exchanged a brief hug. Nothing lingered. No tension, no bitterness. Just closure. "I hear you're doing well," he said. "I am," I replied. "I hope you are too." He nodded. "I've been thinking a lot." I smiled gently. "That's good." There was something different in his eyes now, not regret exactly, but understanding that had arrived too late to matter. And strangely, I felt grateful we hadn't tried to force it, because clarity delayed is still clarity denied. Later that night, driving home, I thought about the version of myself from a year earlier, the woman who'd believed love required disclosure before discernment, generosity before boundaries. I'd been wrong. Love isn't proven by what you give up. It's revealed by what's respected when you don't. A few weeks later, I hosted a small dinner at my place. Just friends. No pressure. No expectations. At one point, someone raised a glass and said, "To new chapters." I smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. After everyone left, I cleaned up slowly, stacking plates, wiping counters, moving through my space with ease. I paused at the window, looking out at the quiet street. This house was still mine. So was my future. I thought about the moment Daniel had asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" as if disclosure would have rewritten everything. But the truth was simpler. I hadn't told him because I was listening. Listening to how he spoke about us. Listening to how his family spoke about balance. Listening to how assumptions grew once the idea of access appeared. Silence had given me information, and information had given me choice. One afternoon, my lawyer called. "Everything's in order," she said. "You're fully protected." I thanked her, hung up, and felt something close to pride, not in the money, but in the foresight. That estate had never been about wealth. It was about agency. Later that evening, I pulled out my grandmother's old photo album. There was one picture of her standing alone on the porch of her house, hands on her hips, eyes sharp but kind. I finally understood what she'd passed down to me. Not assets, authority. The authority to decide what stays private. The authority to say no without apology. The authority to walk away from something that looks good on paper but feels wrong in practice. Months passed. I dated casually, carefully. I noticed red flags sooner and green ones too. I spoke openly about values, about independence, about boundaries. Some men bristled. Others leaned in. That difference told me everything. One evening, as I reviewed my finances, something I now did regularly without dread or secrecy, I smiled at how calm I felt. No fear, no defensiveness, just ownership. I hadn't lost a fiancé. I'd gained clarity before the cost was irreversible, and that was worth more than any shared account or symbolic unity. Because the right person won't ask, "Why didn't you tell me?" They'll ask, "How can I respect this?" And until then, I was more than enough on my own. My life wasn't missing anything. It was finally aligned.